Hello, fellow Auraxians. I wanted to take a moment and respond to Rel real quick. He left a post on a linked video of mine that was a call to action. Now, my call to action is useless at this point. I'm way too late. I had always assumed that the H1Z1 Pro League wouldn't actually happen. They would keep an eye on the player counts, and as they saw the audience dwindle to a point that was too low to really sustain a viewership needed for a tournament, they would gracefully release a canned statement saying, hey, we've decided that H1Z1 is not yet in the place that it can be a good esport. We're going to take some time and focus on improving the game for our player base, and once our player base is content with where H1Z1 is at, then we'll be confident that it can move forward as an esport and help the industry as a whole. Since that never happened, I assumed we still had time. That the coffers were still flush from their 150,000 concurrent peak player count. All the recent activity points to that not being the case. So we really don't have a leg to stand on to leverage this game. I commented on how 2017 was PlanetSide's worst year ever. It's not something I'm happy about, obviously, especially as someone that spent so much time trying to hype the game in that year. But we have to be able to face reality to know where to go in the future. And from his perspective, 2017 was about creating a framework for the future, which is a very admirable goal. And it sounds like the team is confident they achieved that objective. Now, most of my objective last year was to try to get new players into the game, because that's really the only way I can contribute. It's very difficult for me to affect the players that are already here, because they are in tune with the game and they are more dependent on seeing progress and development and good patches that they like. Our average active user base at the beginning of 2017 was 4,526 players, and that's across PC and console. At the end of 2017, our average active player base was 3,180 players, roughly a 30% drop. The trend that I'm seeing and I'm concerned about is after every patch, there is a momentary curiosity blip, and then there is a massive disappointment bleed out. I understand that PlanetSide 2 needs to go under the knife, and they need to go in and fix monetization, but in the process of fixing that up, they've created two massive lacerations that we're bleeding veteran players from. It's sort of a rob Peter to pay Paul strategy. We're going to hit them hard with a monetization system that a lot of people don't like, but it's going to come at a cost of a large portion of the player base. So my concern with that development framework is that it's not a sustainable model. If at the end of the year we were able to make some significant strides with that increased revenue, some new dynamic that really drew all those players back, that would really make a lot of sense to me. But as it stands, it's a big expenditure up front in terms of lost player base, with nothing coming in behind to recoup that player base. And then he was really getting kind of to the meat of my concerns, that when do we get real development? And he mentioned there really wasn't a lot of time between CAI and Critical Mass and when I made that video, with all the things going on. And he's absolutely correct there. I totally understand that. But that's also my sort of concern here. We have the Halloween event, which isn't full-on monetization, but it's not really development either. We've got the anniversary, which is all monetization. We've got Auraxiumed, which is all monetization. And then we run all the way forward to the Advanced Specialization program, which is monetization. And then we've already heard about upcoming promotional events for PlanetSide 1 anniversary, and we've heard about more implants, so there's a lot more monetization on the horizon. My concern here is that we're stuck in that negative loop where we only have time to monetize. And if we can't stabilize the player count, we'll just end up having to pedal faster and faster and faster to try to support rolling out more monetization. So that's why I felt like it was so key to make that strong argument while the H1Z1 coffers were still flush. When the construction system was released, we had roughly a 100% jump in the peak concurrent players. Now, construction wasn't fully flushed out, it didn't work, but it shows that people are willing to come back to this game if they see a big dynamic change. If all we can get are sort of retweaks and rebalances, that's not motivation enough to pull people back, be they disenfranchised veterans or players that have checked it out but didn't really enjoy it. Now, they did mention a new alert type. I don't know if that means tweaks or development. We'll see when that comes out. Following that up was a discussion on a sort of roadmap post that pointed to the Combined Arms update that would come. Now, if you guys have paid attention to my videos, you know I like the concept behind Combined Arms update. But what I noticed from this update is there was a kind of pre and post bleed out of veteran players. Leading up to it, there was some really contentious discussion, and there was no framework for the developers and the community to get on the same team with the patch. Now, I gotta say, I hate balance changes. I feel like we've just been rebalancing the game for 5 years. I wish all of those man hours, and I realize they're easier man hours, could still go to something else that really pushes the game forward. I would gladly trade in my improved striker, my improved carve, my improved fractures for an NS sanctuary or a loot system or guild halls or anything else. So what that meant is I was very removed from that process. But I kind of watched it from the outside, and all I can say is it didn't go well. I remember there being at least 2 or 3 organized playtests, and the feedback from the community just looked like a lot of shouting. And the feedback from the developers was just kind of pick and choosing where to respond on that they could give the most concrete answer. This process needs to be one where it gradually adjusts veteran players to the upcoming changes, and developers can gradually adjust the system to be as in line as possible with the entire user base of that title. And so what I saw is no one really owned that process. And the buck has to stop with someone. In the end, there has to be one head chef. Their vision should be constantly changing, taking in feedback from other members on the team and the community. But in the end, they have to collate all that information into one vision that they're going to chase down. So I completely understand that it's a kind of team process of kind of getting to these places. But there comes a point where after months of testing and the community and the developers haven't been able to come together on the feature, the whole decision to push it live still has to rest on someone's shoulders. And that's why I placed it on the producer. The rest of Rel's comment is something I've iterated 100 times, trying to defend Combined Arms update to veteran players. So I think that's just reiterated again for everyone else reading if they haven't seen it from me 100 times already. And then he went on to comment about implants. And this is where I kind of feel like there's a communication gap between the developers and the player base. All of these changes he brought up, it's not that I failed to mention them, it's that I just didn't see them as worth mentioning. What he's saying here is that, hey, we released the loot crates, and then we gave you ways to get loot crates through directives, and then we gave you ways to get loot crates through alerts, and we made it so the drop tables in those loot crates are better. But the feedback I hear from the players is just, we don't want loot crates. So it's like, change loot crates all you want, hand them out more, change the drop rates in them. But like that's not team development. That's you guys just kind of going with your vision, which is generally opposed to the vision of a lot of the players. And we've paid for it dearly in player count. You know me, I've backed up loot crates. I'm kind of, let's get some development at all costs. It's a really difficult position to argue, right? I mean, there are a lot of ethical concerns about loot crates, especially in this day and age. I have, without a doubt, lost every argument where I've tried to back up the loot crates just to make PlanetSide not seem so awful, because I want PlanetSide to keep going. But at any rate, this process of like releasing a kind of unethical evil system and then kind of inching the system to just being like bad, it's not a sustainable practice. And again, if you could leverage that all into some massive bump where you get some big cool thing to pull all those people back, and they can be like, ah, God, I hate loot crates, I want to take a stand. But God, that Auraxiumed orbital launch alert is just so badass, I gotta go back to playing. But without that huge jump forward in the game, it just seems like we're unnecessarily working the game into the ground faster. And it doesn't really give PlanetSide 2 players legs to stand on to say, hey, we've got this great title over here. When everyone can say, hey, what about Carapace locked behind a loot crate system? Now, he did make a little bit of a dig here, suggesting that if I had my finger on the pulse of the game, I'd draw a correlation to the big upcoming implant drop and the potential for system changes. It's interesting wording because it doesn't say, hey, there's system changes coming. It just says it could happen. So I don't know what that means. If changes are coming, it seems like an easy layup to say, hey guys, we're getting rid of loot crates. I know this ASP system is rushed, but hang in there, we're going to be making some improvements. I don't know why you don't just take that free press right there. As a person that has their pulse on the game and has watched over the last year, what I do see is it seems like the only way that might happen is if everyone screams loud enough. And that as long as people stay quiet, like they have been for a while, it's still going to be loot crates. I'm just going to wait and see if it was a system that they really wanted to volunteer. I feel like it would have been released by now. If it's a system that's reactive to changes in some laws in some countries, and maybe doing an analysis of the dropping player count, then it sort of makes sense to me why it might be released over this summer. I will say to the developers, as someone that's watched for the past year, it seems like the people that get changed are the ones that shout the most. And once a system hits live, it's kind of like it's locked. You might get some tweaks to it, like adding 15 minutes to an alert or improving a drop table, but you won't get serious changes that will really improve the system, just minor tweaks. So I guess what I'd say is don't coyly flirt with us, developers, because we're not going to be able to pick up on it. There's been nothing to pick up on in the past. If you're going to drop loot crates, announce it to the high heavens, make it a press thing, send out a press release, make it a big deal. Say, hey, we're taking a stand. This is unethical. We know we did it because we were following the industry, but we're changing our ways. We're going to be a leader. We're going to get rid of those loot crates. At any rate, that's a pretty exciting tidbit of news there. I worry it's a too little too late sort of thing, but it really has potential to be really good for the game. So definitely be excited about that. Now jumping on to the critical mass system. Now this is an area where I can't really tell where most of the community is at. Combined arms is really obvious. There's a lot of people that didn't like it. Critical mass, I've heard some people that love it and a lot of people that hate it. I think overall it's a more inert change. As for most people, it doesn't really matter what's going on at the meta level of the battle flow. They just want to get in on the next fight. And what alerts going on doesn't really matter to them. That being said, it matters for the leaders. And I'm a firm believer that people getting on and finding a good leader to run with really encourages them to get on. I've talked to a lot of people that when they can't find a good platoon or a good squad to get in with, they just kind of give up on it. So having good incentives there to attract those good leaders will then attract the people that don't care as much about what's going on, but they'll be attracted to that leadership. Now, what I saw the people didn't like was hives generating victory points and that you could lock a continent that way. There was no finale to a continent. There was no big fight at the end. Sometimes you just ruin good fights that were going on. It didn't really make sense when it ended. And a lot of people just voiced that as saying, I don't like the VP system. But what I didn't see a lot of people saying was, we don't like these alerts. People said they wanted new additional alerts. Yeah, that's cool. But the 5 VP alerts were still a fun part of the continent. So the fix is confusing to me. Nuke the alerts that I haven't seen anyone complaining about. Keep the hives that I've seen a lot of people complaining about. And sure, the alert at the end is a better solution. But I mean, we had that before. The continents just waited around for a few hours, the alert triggered, and then someone won. Construction can be relevant because people like to build stuff. And if construction can't be relevant on its own to be a building in between bases, then it shouldn't be shoehorned into the game with hives. So we established that you didn't want them. We established that a large part of the community didn't want them. Seems like all the ammunition you need to delete them. That would have been easy enough to do long ago in the VP system. Anyways, it sounds like it's all moot because changes are coming. My concerns are that I think letting that ride for too long contributes to the overall loss of players. Obviously, you guys have more data than me, but I haven't seen one of these alerts play out differently than how they did on the test server. Maybe different servers than mine have had different results. There's been no gradual change over time or a honeymoon phase. And then we keep hearing this word pivot. And I have parroted that sentiment in my videos to inform my users of the dev strategy of releasing something to live and pivot. I understand that because the test events are not similar to the live server environment. The problem is the pivots. They either don't really happen or they take so long that it really turns into more of a phase 1, phase 2 scenario, which PlanetSide 2 players are acutely and painfully aware of. And that's one of the reasons why people are so resistant to some of these patches making it to the live server, because they really feel like phase 1s. And then responding to the end, I think it's mission impossible to try to convince them to reinvest in a 5-year-old game. And to peel through the books and make sure all the overhead is going to the right places, and to explain how so much of the investment in these titles has been misattributed. No doubt, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but I do know what's going on out in the open. And someone needs to desperately derail these decisions to go off and do something like EverQuest Landmark. These directionless developments, which will permanently turn away players from even the other titles within the company. I've had multiple people on my channel say, yeah, I was a PlanetSide player, but I really wanted EverQuest Next, and after they screwed me there, I won't touch their games again. And when you're about to run an esport tournament that is this massive, with celebrity cameos, with a 7,000 active average user base, yes, someone needs to go do some serious derailment. I realized when it was put in place that that wasn't the numbers, but the numbers were trending that way for a year. Someone needs to be watching that and make sure there is an exit strategy built into the plan. So if, as you continue this project, the numbers continue to trend down, there is a reasonable way out. This is going on through the end of June now. There is no reasonable way out. How do we know it's not the next EverQuest Next? And this part is the most confusing part to me. I didn't ask for apology. I'm still here. I'm the schmuck that's peddling your loot crates, when everyone else in the world thinks that loot crates are a terrible idea. I'm not asking for one, and you don't need to give me an apology. But last year, 30 to 40% of the veteran community were turned away from this game, and there's a strong correlation to when they left and the major patches were released. I had thousands of people tell me they were checking out this game last year. We can't staunch the bleeding fast enough with new players as quickly as you are turning away the old ones. I do not give a crap about Liberators. I've got about 10 kills in one. But I understand taking away single-shot Dalton kills was a strong motivator for a lot of veteran players to leave this game. And those people are my content. They are our content. They are the game. In a sandbox, it's the people that make the game. So I can understand and recognize that it is not a sustainable trend, and for the game to continue, we have to reattract those players. My only frustration with his response is it didn't tell us anything we don't already know. We know most of the year is burdened with monetization. We know Nick isn't the designer, and we know it's more than just Rel making design decisions. We know that you've made iterative patches to the implant system and Combined Arms initiative. But none of those patches have addressed fundamental concerns with those systems. We know that hives are still in and you're concerned about relevance for construction. What we don't understand is why that's a concern. And I am well aware that I have zero visibility into the development process. And that's what I'm so concerned about. That's all for now, fellow Auraxians. Until next time, I will see you planetside.